Greetings, everyone, and welcome to City Lights Live, the online component of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight we are delighted to welcome back to the house Adrienne Maree Brown, celebrating the publication of her new book of essays, Loving Corrections. It's published by our friends over at AK Press as part of the Emergent Strategy Series. Loving Corrections explores the roots of limited thinking that have caused division and disharmony in our lives and culture at large. It offers us a guidebook for reimagining how to hold ourselves accountable, encouraging personal reflection, and nurturing honest relationships. The book is a call for generating genuine empathy and explores how we can break destructive identity-based behavioral patterns. Loving Corrections offers a practical guide and builds upon her previous work, specifically the books Holding Change and We Will Not Cancel Us. So before we begin tonight, as is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. Numerous dialects of the Ohlone language were once spoken all along this peninsula. We would like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who came before us as stewards of the land. Adrienne Maree Brown is a writer, activist, and facilitator. She produces multi-genre writing that is informed by and engaged with radical imagination and transformative justice. Her writing ties into 25 years of movement facilitation, somatics, Octavia Butler scholarship, and her work as a doula. She is the author and editor of several published works, which include Fables and Spells, Octavia's Brood, Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism, amongst others. Her fiction has appeared in The Funambulist, Harvard Design Review, and Dark Mountain. Maroons is her latest novel. So joining her in conversation today will be Matthew David McGorry. He is an actor, best known for his roles in the Netflix comedy drama series Orange is the New Black, and in the ABC legal thriller series How to Get Away with Murder. He is an activist whose work embraces prison abolition, feminism, and various social issues. He is also the co-founder of the social impact company Inspire Justice. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Adrienne Maree Brown and Matthew David McGorry. A pleasure and an honor to have you both with us tonight. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah. I'm super grateful to be here with you, Adrienne. I always love getting the opportunity to be in community with you. It always feels deeply nourishing. So, and I love the book, Loving Corrections. As you can see, it's gotten the full Matt McGorry treatment, which is...
I was like, did you tag it up?
No, I did. No, I did. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I'd love to just sort of enter the space today kind of with how we're showing up and, kind of grounding in what's on our hearts and minds. And I'm happy to lead that, if that feels good.
Yeah, please.
Great.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm also so happy to be here with you. Like, for so many different reasons, I'm so inspired by how you're living your life and how you're using your talents and gifts that you've been given. But particularly you as a reader, like, I feel like you're such an exacting, precise reader. Like, you're someone who really cares about learning and sharing what you learn. So it feels like geek to geek, like, best case scenario for getting to talk to someone about this book. So thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you. I love that. Yeah. And I think it's maybe your fifth book that I've read now, which is pretty awesome.
Wow. Yeah.
So cool.
I was like, you're in deep on the journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for being a part of that. Yeah. So I'm, like I said, I'm extremely excited to be here today. I've also, sharing vulnerably and sort of, as my friend Amina Altai says, whole modeling. It's been a while since I've done some speaking things. I haven't talked about this publicly yet. I will talk about it more sort of at another point soon, but I've been dealing with long COVID now for a year and a half. And it has fucked me up in a lot of ways. And one of the ways is sort of the cognitive stuff. And so, I'm kind of leaning into trusting that, showing up as myself as I am is the way to do it. Your presence is always very sort of grounding for me. And so I always know I feel very held in conversation with you. So I'm really excited for that. It's interesting to note the different changes in the body process and how that interacts. And but I'm also really just grateful and excited to be here with you today.
Hmm, I'm really glad. Um, I yeah, I'm like, you know, I want to say like I'm so sorry about the long COVID piece. And I'm hesitant to say so sorry because I'm like, yeah, who knows what these changes are, right? Who knows if they're the changes that are like adapting you to be ready for some next phase that what like I feel like there's so little we actually understand about what's happening. But I'm sorry because you've had to do it in this society where there's no room to be changing. um, and yeah, so I'm grateful to be here with you. That's one part of how I'm showing up to this conversation. I'm just coming back. I took a solo birthday retreat
Mhm.
last week and took myself away, mostly went offline, took a stack of books and went to the ocean
Mm.
and let a lot of grief happened, a lot of release happened. Like, um, I was laughing with a friend. This might be TMI, but I'm also showing up as I am, and I'm a TMI type of girl. So I had a colonic,
Mhm.
and I'm a big fan of doing a birthday colonic.
Mm.
Because the whole process is like letting go of anything that's built up inside your body. And I've been like, oh, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, so much had been building up and was like unreleasable at the
Mm.
pace that life moves right now. There's just like no time for a good emotional shit, physical shit, whatever it is. And so I feel like I spent some time just clearing and being like, okay, like I'm in this time of immense contradictions. I'm in a time of immense grief. I'm in a time of anticipatory grief. I'm in a time of a lot of love and a lot of like feeling humbled and impressed by how people are adapting in this time. All of that's happening, but I had to like let myself feel, just be a
Mm.
feeling being. Um, and so I'm coming back into my daily life, like, okay, how does a feeling being do my life? um, and this is my first like thing, like event. And it's
Mm.
really good that it's with you and that we're both like, hey bear, hey friend.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that's me coming in today.
Thank you for sharing that. And
Mhm.
thank you also for that, yeah, reminder and in this time of ongoing multiple crisis and
Mm.
uh, trauma, um, to not let it numb us and to take the time and the space to really feel and
Yeah.
allow the embodiment, as painful as it is, um,
Yeah.
because it allows us to birth something different. Um,
Yeah. Well, I have to just say this. Have you ever read Clay's Ark by Octavia Butler?
no.
Okay. So I know you're more of a nonfiction guy. So I'm just going to tell you Clay's Ark, there's basically this like alien disease comes to Earth that starts making people into these wild creatures. Like they start to lose a lot of what we would think of as cognitive ability, but
Mm.
gaining all these different physical capacities and like learning how to feel a ton and living from a feeling body. And I'm always trying to think like what's happening, what's changing that we're not even aware is changing or we don't even understand yet. But I keep hearing from people, whether it's because of long COVID, whether it's because of overwhelming grief, whether it's because of climate catastrophes or other changes, like we're having to learn to be people who feel
Mm.
and that like slow down and attend to what the body requires.
Mm.
And it's happening in a lot of different ways, but it seems at this point like, oh, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think there's something about this. I mean, I think we're living in a moment where like, oh, it's not sufficient to be on earth with just your brain
Yeah.
because just your brain does not get us to justice. It gets people into very like twisted ways of doing injustice.
The whites,
Um,
absolutely.
Whereas if you're in your feeling, your felt sense, not just feeling your own emotions, because I think, last night the debate was like watching like what happens when someone's just completely controlled by their emotions. But when you're like, I can feel my connection to others, I can really feel like what you were saying, it's like this this is different now. To have a conversation, in public, to manage all this, it's different. But I'm like, yeah, we have to slow down, we have to prepare and be present. And I think those things feel like good adaptations that are coming out of hard things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for
Mhm.
that. Yeah. So one part of the book that I thought was especially beautiful was the equinox spells. And I was curious to hear about the origins of that, and also if you would so graciously read us the fall equinox spell, as we are not quite there yet, but as we are
Okay.
transitioning there.
Yeah.
Adrienne reads it. I would invite everyone on the call, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes and let the soothing sounds of Adrienne Marie Brown lull you into a new place and help us ground in this conversation.
Yay. Yeah, so I did a column for Yes Magazine called Murmurations.
Mm.
And as part of the column, that was kind of the arrangement. It was like, I'll do a monthly column, and then I want to do these spells for the solstices and the equinoxes. And because it's part of my practice, like part of what I do for myself. And I don't do a ton. Like, I'm a kind of random witch in my own way, but there's certain things that I'm like, oh, I really like to pay attention to the quarters and like what's shifting in this way of thinking about this cycle of the world makes a lot of sense to me. And I want to call in. So each of these spells is like, what does this season ask us to do, and how does it tell us to be, and what is more possible in this season? So yeah, we're heading into fall. It's September. As a September baby, I'm like, this is always like one of my favorite times of the year because it's like new, fresh school year, new journal, new everything, but also like everything is going to die right now. It's like the combo of like, we're starting all this like learning and scholarship, but we're having to like let go of a lot of the material world again and trust that it'll come back. So here we go. Spell for the fall equinox. And again, the invitation here is close your eyes, drop into your body a bit more, and really feel into what fall means for you. The nights stretch themselves over our harried hearts. There's no differentiation now. Each day we come apart in new ways at old seams. We age on the edge of crises we thought were hyperbolic till they knocked upon our door. One answer to the chaos is hibernation. One answer to the fire is snow. Let us carve out caverns for our rest now. Howl down the dust and let no harm come as we sleep. Lay naked and huddled. The truth is forever muddled. The fools took the future hostage, but we are seed and spore. One answer to death is a haunting. One gift of each harvest is more. Let your leaves fall down and sing to your ghosts. Nourish life with everything you release. Ours is not the only life on earth, not the only death, nor the only death. Let your altars hold the earth and the sky and sea. It is time to gather and grieve, time to listen and pray, time to find the cave that curves against our spines. Shorten every workday to catch the brief sun. Be bare under softest blanket. Dream of pumpkin, root, and pine. The half earth grows dark, inviting you to rest. The hungry earth needs the dreams that only come with depth.
Hmm.
And so it is.
Thank you for that.
Mm.
Wrapped in a warm blanket.
Yeah. I'm such a like cozy season. Yeah. But it's also like it really is what I wish for everyone on earth. Like
Mm.
I'm like, if I was to like really bear, like put it down to the simple, I'm like cozy bed to sleep in, like a soft place where you can rest and trust you're waking and you can let go and trust that it'll nourish. And
Mm.
yeah, it really is. And a good meal, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, friend.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I hope everyone else is feeling that as well. I know everyone is. Yeah. Shorten every work day, as Lisa says. Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. I'm just like, stop
Yeah.
working.
Do that
The
in every
sun's gonna be
season.
out for like 3 seconds.
Exactly. Um, uh, yeah. So in sort of kind of moving into the next question, I'm interested in knowing sort of, the book is so much about transformation, growth, healing, and the ways that that is a part of accountability. And I'm interested in knowing, I know we talk about that fucking up is a part of the process, right? It's an essential part of the process. I'm curious to know if there are any ways that you have been recently growing and transforming, and particularly any ways that you uh, feel proud of. I'm also
Mhm.
happy to share about that as well. But
Um,
yeah, interested to hear about that.
yeah, I like this question. I'm like, all the time, baby.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things in this season, we're in this election season, and I identify as a post nationalist, which means for me, I think the experiment has already failed and we're in actually a different phase. That it's like, I don't think that electoral politics can like be a political home. I don't expect it to like satisfy me. So there's ways that I can let that tap me out of the process, and which is not like the most responsible place to interact from. And so I noticed myself doing that a little bit, just being like, this shit's a mess. There's nothing to be done. Like, fuck it. And then panicking from that place of just like, there's nothing to be done. And because it's one thing to hold the idea of like, I recognize the failure of these systems. And there's another thing to be like, and the rug is being pulled out. Who's the rug being pulled out from under, when, um, and I am of that generation where it was like I felt my parents moving towards a certain kind of stability of ideas of permission to be in a body, of permission to be who they were. I'm supposed to be the next iteration of that. And then it feels like there's this moving backwards. So I can feel all this happening. And what was showing up was like this real critical, cynical energy in me.
Mhm.
And it's comfortable. It's really comfortable to be like, yeah, fuck all this, fuck it. Let it fall apart, let it fall down. And I had to really gather myself and be gathered a little bit, by folks who are like, your cynicism has a bigger impact than maybe anyone else's cynicism, might have. Not anyone else's, but like you have impactful cynicism because you have impactful hope. And we're not saying you have to produce hope in this moment, but be cautious about how you're wielding your cynicism and how you're wielding that discontent. And so the place I decided to turn to is, why don't I just ask people who know more than I do and who do this work more often? And I put myself back in student mode, right?
Mhm.
That I'm like, okay, I know I trust my stance completely. I know that I'm a post nationalist. I understand how I feel about this country. And let me talk to a bunch of different people who are orienting differently than I do and ask a little bit like what I need to understand. Like, what time is it on the clock of the world? And where does this moment fit into the larger organizing strategies you're doing? And I got so humbled. I was
Mhm.
expecting, I don't know, I think I was expecting like a ton of different options and directions and perspectives. And what kind of astounded me was all the people who are like working on the ground, actually moving masses of people, were pretty aligned, where
Mhm.
they were just like, the election is not where the things happen. It's when people are paying attention, but
Right.
it's not actually how the changes that we most care about happen. So we use the elections to create the terrain in which we do our organizing. And everyone just was like, oh,
Mhm.
yes, that's what it is. Because, it's hard not to get caught up in the cult of personality and the cult of crisis and all those things. And so I just felt like that was this humbling moment for me where I was like, oh, my high horse doesn't actually build movement and it doesn't help anyone.
Mhm.
Um, And it doesn't even help the people, I'm angry for very good reasons, but even my high horse doesn't help the people I'm angry on behalf of and with. So that was humbling.
Mm,
And just to remind myself that like I don't want to just be operating as an individual with opinions. Like I want to be tied into a larger discourse on our species, not
mm,
just our nation, right? Like I don't think in terms of nation. I think in terms of species. And I'm like, the nation in which I was born is having a really detrimental impact on the species I so desire and I so love. And yeah, there are actually moves to make from that place. Um, so that's been one really big one. Um, I think another more personal one, I recently had someone who my experience of them was like, they're really pulling away from me. Like they're really pulling away from our rituals and our practices. And I was getting my feelings really caught up in a knot about how I do everything I can to make sure that everything is da 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 da. And like, da da da, like I really was just like,
mhm.
you don't want all this good love I'm putting out, da da da. And a good friend of mine was like, maybe think of it from their perspective. Like, could anything else be going on? And I was like, I mean, I guess they could be their own person with like their own life, you know? Dang. So
Uh,
I reached out and was just sort of like, I've noticed this pulling away. What's going on? And immediately the answer was like, I'm so overwhelmed. There's so much going on. I need you. And I was like, let me send you a DoorDash gift card and like, you know what I mean? Like, let me be a human to your human rather than, I immediately was just like, let go of this story. The
mm,
story has nothing to do with that person's actual life. You
mhm.
know, you're just picking up data and you're assigning a story to that data, but that doesn't mean it's actually the true story. So that's another thing. I'm like, let my fiction writing be for fiction and not for my relationships.
Love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what what kind of like about that relates a little bit in sort of my mind. And what I was thinking about sharing too is like
Yeah.
around kind of ego and sort of holding on to, yeah, holding on. I think for myself, I think I feel like I just recently, like a few months ago, let go of the last sort of vestiges of like defensiveness, um,
Mm.
where I realized I would let myself be defensive if I actually was right. Like if I was right and I had the moral upper
Oh,
hand,
yeah.
I was like, and I think part of this also is because I know you said in one of your other talks with Mary Hooks and Charlene Carruthers, you're talking about being the rescuer, right?
Yes.
I had also very much had a pattern,
Just like, here I
right,
come.
right. And I think as I was shifting out of that, I think I was noticing, all the emotional sort of labor that I had willingly taken on because of what it had given me in terms of, ego or sense of value and stuff. And when I started to shift that, I think I would get like angry and feel that defensiveness come in when I was like, you're going to make me now do all this emotional labor to do this thing. And basically, what I sort of came to was even if I am right, um, it's not effective.
Mm.
It doesn't resolve the conflict. It creates more conflict and new conflict. And it's something that it's a pattern that I was able to really, I feel like, identify.
Yeah.
Feels so good and grounding to be able to trust in your ability to resolve conflict, right?
Oh,
And to
yeah.
know that you're like, I can go and I can say anything I need to say,
Yes.
because I trust that, I have the skills and I'm not holding on to the ego that I can kind of move through it.
I love that. You know, I've been thinking about this lately that I'm like, oh, I'm right for me,
Mm,
right? Like my whole argument, that's correct from my perspective, but I'm the only one living in my perspective. So I can hold on and be like, yeah, I'm totally right for me. But that person has a different whole life and experience. And so let me just hear what they have to say. Let me bring it in. And then boundaries help with that too. I find that like trusting myself to set and hold boundaries is
exactly.
giving me so much more space when it comes to defensiveness and conflict.
So
So I'm just
real.
like, we could fight. And if I don't like it, like, I'm
Right.
gonna put you at a different space
Right.
for me. And like you can do the same, which has also been a fun way. Like I've been doing that with my social media where I'm like,
Mm,
you're not gonna like everything. My job is not to make you like it. This is for me. I'm communicating what I want to communicate. And you can opt in, you can opt out. Or some people, the way they like things is to argue in comments. I'm like,
mm,
that's how you're enjoying yourself. You're having a blast.
sure.
This is how you want to spend your day.
Yeah.
That's totally fine for you. I did what I wanted to do. You do what you want to do.
Yeah. That's real.
Mhm.
Um, and speaking of, in terms of like accountability and stuff, one thing I've been thinking about, there's one section in your book. I was thinking either I could read it or I could have you read it. It's,
Mm. Why
it's
don't
the
you read it? I'm like,
Hey,
this is.
I'll read it.
I'm like, oh my God, you read it.
Okay.
Like, I haven't had enough of
Um,
that.
yes, I'm gonna shout out my mom too, who's on the call, and she always
Wait,
has.
can I shout out your mom? Hi,
Yes,
thanks for
please.
having Matt. Matt
Oh,
is so freaking awesome, and you did such a good job of raising this human. Thank you so much.
oh, I can picture my mom now.
Is she
Um,
swooning? Oh my God, good job.
she's great. She's a wonderful, beautiful human being,
Mm.
and she always reminds me to speak slower. And even on I feel like in my roles, oftentimes I kind of mumble and stuff. And even that, speaking of accountability, was something that at some point I had to realize is an accessibility need.
Exactly.
And yeah, so thanks for that, Mom. So yeah, the part I'm reading is around page 174. And I know I'm about noticing collective denial and specifically around COVID. Um,
Mhm.
I'm wanting to kind of, given my personal experience has shifted a lot, I'm interested in kind of bringing this in and also mentioning even more about sort of my accountability where I was not accountable, and also thinking about how our movement can be more accountable.
Right.
Um,
Let's
so
go there.
notice collective denial.
Mm.
We are living in a global pandemic with a virus that has long-lasting and debilitating impacts if it doesn't kill you. Those who survive are reshaped by the virus, some in overt ways we currently call long COVID, some in ways that don't show up until there's a sudden death months later. We also don't know what COVID will do to the generation of children we forced back into schooling conditions where they could not truly protect themselves, let alone the ever-growing number of children orphaned by the virus. And yet, we now board planes and traverse a world full of unmasked, unprotected people because our government supports the capitalist-fueled rejection of necessary COVID adaptations, precautions that save lives, that protect the disabled and immunocompromised among us aren't lucrative. Taking even the smallest, simplest step towards community care, like consistently wearing a mask, now feels like swimming upstream or shouting a political stance, even as people continue dying from a virus that keeps spawning new variants. And yeah, I want to say, when I read this, I so deeply appreciated it and felt so seen because, um, you know, as someone who newly identifies as disabled, um, and uh, I recognize, how lonely it feels, to often feel that disability is something that we don't really embrace on the left, right? In terms of disability justice, we list it in our lists of isms, right? We talk about it sometimes in terms of how even ableism impacts the currently abled people, right? But sometimes the most material like change, and I didn't understand. There's so just to kind of for my own accountability, sharing part, there's someone in my life that I deeply love and care about who's been severely disabled by long COVID. The spectrum is really great in terms of what is possible. And I thought that I was showing up for them in the right way by making sure to like take COVID safety measures when I was with them and leading up to seeing them. And I
Mm.
didn't really understand. We've been kind of sold this narrative of like, oh, it's individual risk and assessment, all this stuff. And I didn't understand when when they were asking me to not just do it for them, I didn't understand why it felt so personal. And of course, now that I'm in this position and I can't afford to get COVID again, I understand it's the same thing as me being a white person being like, I'm going to be anti-racist with my BIPOC friends.
Yes.
But everywhere else, I'm just going to live my white supremacist life. Because at the end of the day, some of the most important work we're doing is like as a white person organizing other white people, right? And if my friend's like, yeah, I'll wear a mask for you, but I'm not going to wear it elsewhere, then I can't help but think of when I or someone I love is in a medical setting on an airplane or something. If it you shouldn't only care about it because it's me that's disabled. So yeah, I guess wanting to kind of share that, and I'm curious how you feel like we can get to a place. I've realized my capacity to have conversations being newly directly impacted is so
Mhm.
different than me having conversations with other men about patriarchy or other white people about white supremacy. My capacity to do this
Yeah.
is so low, especially with the effects of long COVID. Anyway, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on kind of where we are in the movement with that and how we shift that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you uplifting this section. Like when I was writing it and thinking about it. So I will say I'm someone who's never had COVID, right?
Mm,
And as of today, I think I might be the only person I know now. There was like a set of 4 people that were like that I was in friendship with, and all of them in the last month have finally gotten it. And um, and I was someone who, for the first, I'd say 2.5, 3 years, was like so hyper vigilant and really not super nice about it. Like not super, I wasn't trying to be kind about it. I was just like, don't get, it was just very, very like Virgo, Virgo oldest child given something to be right about. I was just like, you can't fuck with me. Like, there's protocols and I know what they are. Um, I think that we missed a moment, or we missed a boat where, and this is what often happens, where we like are counting on the state to provide something that the state doesn't give a fuck about.
mm,
So to provide like safety for masses of people is not what the state actually cares about, like our state and most states actually care about. And so that was one of the quickest things we saw happen in the world. Was the US was one of the first places to be like, we're going to run back to capitalism and serving money, rather than taking the time, because even now, today, I saw something recently, someone posted, and they were just like, if even right now, today, we could do a 3-week lockdown globally and
mm,
like stop this,
right.
you know, and just deal with, the folks who have long COVID, then we could actually focus the energy and focus that attention there. But it would take the will to do that. So I feel like we were counting on the state to provide something instead of remembering, like, that's not who they are and that's not what they do. So how are we going to set our own practices with each other? And I think some people did that. I think some communities have done that. But I think writ large, we missed that boat. And we were just sort of like, well, we're angry about this, but and so we're taking the anger about it and turning it at each other and making it individual, right? Making it like, why are you so fucked up? Why are you so fucked up? Rather than being like, how do we set culture of practice?
Mm,
And I'm in Durham, where I really appreciate the culture of practice that has emerged here. And I also see places where there's none of it. There's like some places where it's like no one's wearing a mask anymore, and everyone's just showing up places. And then, like yesterday, I went to a gathering for Grassroots Global Justice, which is a group that I love and respect, and they are here in Durham. And they had a whole protocol. They have a process whenever they come together as a group that they're in. And I think that's one of the things I see as most helpful, is actually creating conditions where people get to practice. Like, here's what it's like to be right now and to be in good practice with each other. And here's what it's like to normalize that. That's like, oh, I'm going over there, so let me take my antigen test and then go out and see my people. And knowing that, and the arrangement that they made in that space was like, everyone take a test before you come into the space. and then you can choose whether to mask or not mask, but you know that everyone in the space has tested negative. And that's the protocol I'm seeing in a lot of places. I've also been in places where they're like, everyone test and we're also going to mask. What I did for the book tour I just went on was I just had everyone mask. And then I made an agreement with folks where I was like, if I can take off my mask, if everyone's masked, and then if you feel uncomfortable with that, then we can rearrange. And we did a couple of variations on like, I looked at it experimentally. I was like, okay, let's try this, let's try this, let's try that. And what I found worked the best was to talk with my co-conversant first about like, what are we going to practice? What do you want to practice? What do I feel comfortable with, and getting consent there? And then asking the room, telling the room, like, here's what we have agreed that we would like to do. Close your eyes, raise your hand if you have an issue with it or if you want something else to happen. That way, it's not like a pressure, like now everyone has to look at the one person in the room who doesn't want it. And then if there's even one person in the room who doesn't want it, we just keep the mask on. And what I found, I'm enjoying practices like that because I find that it allows there to be a collective decision about what's going to happen one way or the other, rather than just some people are going to do this and some people are going to do that and no one's actually going to talk about it. And some people are going to be furious and feeling like they're always the one who has to talk about it. Like, that's the thing that I find. And I like that you brought up the experience of like being a white man and being like, oh, I'm always the person who has to bring this up to a white man or whatever. I'm like, no one, I didn't sign up for that job. Like, no one signed up to be the COVID educator, you know? No one signs up for being organizer on most of these things. Like, that's not what we chose to do with our lives. It's like we're trying to survive together. So I like collectivizing the issue. And then I appreciate this piece around, if you don't mask in every space you go into. I think one of the things that I've been struggling with is when I'm working with groups of people and we're coming up with collective practices that allow us to be with each other, and then trying to navigate the online offline space. Because I feel like a lot of times I'll see stuff where I'm like, I'm in a space where we took all the protocols, we did everything we need to do so that we could be in the space with each other. And we post pictures from that and people are like, what the fuck? And I'm like, no, we're actually in great practice, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been thinking about as a next step for myself, at least, is taking the time to just be like, here's the COVID safety protocols of the images that you're seeing, right? Of the spaces, because I'm like, I'm still practicing, and I'm I'm practicing what feels right for me, for my body. I will also say this, as a fiction writer, I recently have been working on a story about um, a future in which they're able to trace back COVID, like specifically see who infected who, infected who, infected who, infected who, all the way back to the very beginning. And in that tracing process, they do a truth and reconciliation process. And it turns out that people who appeared to not have COVID were the super spreaders, right? Or appeared to not, because I was like, for me, that's one of the things that helped me the most from the very beginning was like, you don't have to be sick, look sick, have any symptoms or anything else to be carrying it and infecting people. And I think that that's been forgotten. And I'm just like, no, like, at this point, my feeling is like, just because I've never had it doesn't mean I haven't carried it around. I'm like, it just means there's something else going on because it's a global virus. So yeah, I think those are some pieces. But for me, I always will, and you'll hear this from me often. I'm always like, community is always the answer, especially when the way the problem has been structured has been individualized. That's like, oh, if they're telling us everyone just do it, handle it yourself, whether it's abortion, whether it's vaccines, whether it's anything else, it's like, no, reprogramming, come together with people that you love and trust and figure it out. And then anytime you're with other people, figuring it out and figuring it out, like, you said with your friend where you're like, well, if you only do this with me, then it's like, right, do we need a pod? Like, what is the structure we need so that you can have your needs, I can have my needs, and we're in a community that's all honoring and respecting each other's needs.
Right.
I also want to say this because part of what started to shift some of my protocols was being in relationship with parents and watching them be like, well, I'm in a scenario where I'm having to send my kids into a space where I can't keep up the things that I want to keep up in our home. And so I'm not able to protect myself and my family. And I'm like, oh, I can see what this can either just create this huge schism where parents only spend time with parents, and and I have seen that happening. But for me, that was a choice then that I had to balance and weigh it out, that I'm like, I still want to have a relationship with these parents and with their kids. I want to be in a relationship with these families that are going in and out of the school system. And so what's my protocol got to be to stay in right relationship with them? And now I live in a state where there's a mask ban. So it's flipped all the way to the other side. And for folks who are not following that for political reasons, they're like, um, so that they can shut down protest and like track who's where. They're making
Right.
it so we're not allowed to wear masks in these spaces, or they can come and say you can't. If you
And they
have
can,
a disability, apparently you're supposed to be able to say like, I have a disability and I have to have this on, and they can't really check that. So that's right now our defense against it. But we are playing a game with these people. Like they're always like, we're making moves, and we're like, how do we not? To me, I don't want to always be making defensive moves. I want community is the place where I'm like, let's move to offensive moves, like our offense. And so that's what I see movement starting to do, is being like, okay, here's a practice. When you're gathering, you do this.
yeah,
And yeah, those are some of the thoughts.
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. And
How's that land with you?
yeah, I mean, look, I think I think intentionality, like, I have one friend other than you who's, I don't know if you would necessarily identify as directly impacted by this, but who, shout out to Richie Reseda, who's not directly impacted by, COVID, but who actually gets it, of
Yes.
course, anyone, I didn't think I was vulnerable either, right? Like, and that's like the effective way the system creates those divisions and the vulnerable and the not vulnerable, right? But at the end of the day, just like white supremacy harms white people too, it
Oh yeah.
disproportionately harms
Oh yeah.
black folks, but same with patriarchy and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's, I'd love to continue to be a part of like any conversations around that. I've done, a lot of sort of
Yeah.
learning around it, and it's such a yeah, it's such an interesting and difficult thing, right? Because I think to even be able to say to someone, this is what I need for safety, right?
Yes.
It's such a vulnerable thing, right?
Yes.
And to be able to even do that, to share air with someone. Um,
Yes.
and I think that, for those folks who think that they can afford to get COVID over and over again, um,
Yeah.
they don't understand the weight of that, right?
Yeah.
It's me asking you to show up in an anti-ableist way in
Yes.
this moment, and anything other than like real intention to support and show up for that, I'm going to feel uh like basically what I feel now, which is like I just can't really have these conversations with people who aren't
Who
impacted.
aren't who aren't there. And I think that, you know, I remember first learning disability justice as a framework. I remember being in a space with Mia Mingus, who was one of the first people who I was learning from. And Mia just breaking things down for me, where it was like, this has been the way, this is what it means to be disabled. So this has been this mass disabling event. And so we have tons of new people having this experience. But this is, for me, I have severe arthritis and I have a lot of conditions and a lot of disabilities at this point. So for me, I always experience it when I'm going to go anywhere, where I'm like, I can't go somewhere where there's stairs.
Right,
And everywhere I go, I get there and they're like, there's only four.
right,
I'm
right.
like, okay, so four is like four times more than the zero that I said I could do,
Exactly.
or whatever it is. Or, I'm like, I can't walk a long distance. They're like, oh, it's just like a couple blocks. It's like no big deal. And I'm like, for your body, it's no big deal. For my body, it could take a week for me to recover if I overdo what you're asking me to do. And I have my own internalized ableism. So I'm constantly like shutting down the voice inside me that is just simply stating what I need and advocating. And I'm like, I don't want to have to advocate for it. And part of what happened during COVID when everything shut down was my body was like, oh, in the same way that the ocean was like, this is helpful. Like,
Mm,
please, everybody stop flying all over the place. We
mm,
need to dolphin. We need to clean this up. my body had the same experience, like as a saltwater being. I was just like, oh, I don't need to be getting on a plane every other day. I need to sit still. I need to root somewhere. I need to, that's not natural. Like I being nomadic, yes, but not the way that I've been. I just had a place where my things were, you know?
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm flying all these places to talk about the climate. So, it was also that moment of being like, if I love the earth and I love my body, I need to stop traveling. I'm going to put a travel ban on myself. And it was like, this is the way to stay safe from COVID and to be good to the earth and to be good to my arthritis and be good to everything else. And for a while, that was really working. And then everyone was like, we're not going to, basically, no one says it that explicitly, but they're like, we're not going to pay you unless you bring your body
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this real, again, it's this painful thing because I'm like, oh, you're asking me to do something that's definitely going to cause me harm. Like there's, it's going to hurt the earth. It's going to hurt my body. It's going to expose me possibly to COVID now. It's like all these things. I'm like, and you could have me, like, I'll give you my total presence and we
Right.
can do that virtually. Now we know we can do it and I can be present with you. But folks are like, sorry, like we won't, or we'll pay you, but we'll pay you like, a tiny percentage if you're not
Right.
physically willing to do this. So that's a question that I want to have more conversations around. And my team has been working with me on this. So like, how do we negotiate this with people? And it'll even be like, we're doing a climate conference, but you have to fly here. And I'm just
Right.
like, God, I can't wait till we look. I always am like, I hope that history will have a sense of humor about us, but also really a sense of like, oh, what what was this period about? It's so irrational. There's so many completely irrational decisions being made all the time. And you have to be like whack-a-mole in your way to safety and whack-a-mole in your way to health and
Yeah.
community. Um, but inside of all of that, community continues to be the thing I keep coming back to and being like, oh, like being disabled is actually the common experience of the majority of people on earth at some point in our lives. We will not be able bodied. And some of us are born that way, some of us become that way. So, why don't we have a society that's structured around different abilities and having our needs being met at the front of how we have all conversations? And I feel like I'm still learning, like that's the thing. It's like, oh, I don't know what I don't know. And so I try to be pretty positive in my responses when people do gather me or call me in or remind me, like, why don't you have an interpreter for this? Or why don't you have, or can you slow down so that the interpreter can do their work? Can you slow down? Like, I'm like, oh, that's those are still growing edges for me. And yeah, I also feel, I'm going to take a risk and say this, but so much of COVID, when it was first happening, I was like, this is a disease of the lungs. This is something that happens in the lungs, which is where grief lives.
Mm.
And I feel like so many of the people who have long COVID, it's like in a way they're carrying,
Mm.
it's like I'm carrying the grief of
Mm.
the world. It has completely transformed my system. I won't go back. I've become a griever. I've become someone who carries the grief of the world. And I think a lot of the deaths that we had are like people who like I died from the grief of the world. Like it was overwhelmed the system. And I it just feels significant to me
Yeah.
to be like, oh, like it has to be felt somewhere.
Yeah.
It has to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
And it comes out in, I think it comes out in mass sickness, mass illness. Um, and then I think it comes out in other ways, mass violence.
Yeah. I think also what we're seeing is the the people who have long COVID are the reminders that most of us have not grieved this couple year time period that even in the best case was traumatizing and isolating and frightening, right? And that's why we see, I think, the denial around new information is so, it's not based in actual logic. It's based in, I think it's a fear-based response of, even for myself, when I was not acknowledging that I could possibly have long COVID, because if I could possibly have long COVID, then I can't afford to get it again. And if I can't afford to get it again, then I have to live my life in a very different way. Uh, yeah,
That's
so it's real.
that's right.
Yeah. I have one more question, and I could talk about this all day. All day and all night. But, I know that pleasure is such an important part of your life and your practice and your activism. And Pleasure Activism is definitely one of my favorite books, and I've given it to many, many people.
Mm.
And I'm just wondering how did sort of pleasure fit into the writing process of this book?
Mm. That's a really good question. I mean, I think one thing is the practice of loving corrections has become something really pleasurable for me.
Mm,
Not always in the moment,
mm,
but living in a life in which I know how to do this and I'm in relationship with other people who know how to do this, to be like, we can have conflict well, which means we actually both get to be ourselves.
mm,
We all get to be ourselves and we can have the differences arise and we can handle them. There's a real pleasure to being in communities with that capacity and in relationships with that capacity. So I think that that would be the first thing. And then the second is I've really had some breakthroughs in how I do my writing. And I've become quite a self-indulgent writer. I got myself a little home that is in a quiet, quiet place. And I have a screened in back porch and I have a bathtub. And these are the things I noticed that whenever I would go away, how you are as a writer is basically you're trying to go to one writing retreat or one fellowship or something at a time. So you can just like, can I go somewhere and close the door and actually just write? It's really hard to get that space. And I was like, I want to be writing full time. So I need to make my home that space. I
mm,
don't need to be going away all the time. And it doesn't have to be big. I learned that. I was like, I really like a kind of a cozy situation, but I need a good bathtub and I need
mm,
like a screened-in porch or someplace where I can sit and be outside without getting eaten alive. So for this book, I wrote a ton of it in a bathtub. In my bathtub, I have like a little setup and it's like a little tray that goes across the top of the bath.
mm,
And I sit in there and it allows me to like write, but I go overboard. Like, I'm writing. I need to put a face mask on. I need to put a hair mask on. I'm pouring hot water over myself between chapters or whatever. Like I'm just like really trying to make it this indulgent, wonderful experience for my body. So because I had started to get to a place where I'm writing with my thumb on my phone all the time and my hand is not happy and my body is like, girl, what you're
mm,
curling in on yourself and you're curling in on your ideas. Everything's getting small and tight and like, what will fit on the internet, right? I need to be in the bath, I need to be in the water with big spacious oceanic potential to write, so I think that was a really big one. And then I was also really I've been on this food journey. I don't know if, yeah, because we haven't talked about this, but I've been on this whole journey with disordered eating, where I had this big aha that I think probably a lot of other people in my life had sort of been like, But, you keep trying to get in right relationship with your body, and then something keeps happening. You just keep being like, I don't know what's happening. And then every time anyone in my life dies, which has happened a ton in this past decade, um, it's like I gain it's like I have to gain almost their body. Like I'm just like I gain weight every time someone passes and my knees and my ankles are like, bitch, we can't do this anymore. And I'm like, okay, but I don't do weight loss. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in dieting. I don't believe in that. So I was really like, I'm in a real conundrum because like my body is telling me something needs to change, but I don't believe in that process. And so I really have been working on like, oh, what would right relationship with my body look like for me?
mm,
And so a big part of this book writing process was like, how can I not go down the path of eating cereal and pizza, which is how I often get to a stage with my books where I'm like, I can't cook. I'm
mm,
being an artist.
mm,
And with this one, I was like, you're still gonna not cook, but like, what can you do that makes you not go off the deep end? And so I had factor meals, and I just found like things that were like still healthy and had some protein to them and had some other stuff. And I gave myself a little budget for ordering in food. And I just did all these things to be like, okay, eat really well. Why
Mm.
don't you do this book from a place of like being deeply nourished? What does that look like? And I feel like it shows up. I feel like the book feels grounded in that way, that it's like, this is no nonsense. Adrienne is fed and she's just
Mhm.
offering some things to you. She's taking care of her body and she's offering, like, I really do think there's something about um, living in the world as it is, which is a place of a lot of devastation. It's actually really important to protect the vessel that is trying to navigate that devastation and navigate. Like, I take on a lot of hard things in this book, but I took it on from a place of like being as loving to myself as possible as the stuff was coming through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And orgasms. I mean, like, I'm a big, big fan of like, I reward myself with orgasms. I like handle, if I feel like a little writer's block or whatever, I'm like, I can probably go unplug that, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, I definitely, when I'm writing, like, I'm always been like an orgasm a day person, and I really stand by that. For me, that's really what works. When I'm writing, it goes up. I'm just like, I definitely need more than one. I definitely need like a multitude of different kinds of orgasm. But yeah, that's always been a part of it. I find actually most writers, whether they'll admit it or not, I think most writers have like an orgasmic process that's part of the journey. So
Yeah. Also, if you're in your bathtub already, you might as well,
you're in the bathtub. I mean, I'm actually not. Yeah, I should practice more in the bathtub. I have them as like separate practices right
Right,
now.
right.
But
That's fair.
no, you've got me. You've got me inspired. That's good. That's
Okay.
the next move. Is I'm just
It's
like,
a
I don't
challenge.
even have to get out of the bath. The thing that's so great about the bathtub is you can't have your computer plugged in, while you're in the bath. So it has this sort of natural time thing. It's
Mm.
like you're just gonna write for the 3 hours that your computer will hold a charge or whatever. And then you have to get out and take a break and walk around and go outside or whatever because you have to charge your computer back up. So
Yeah.
that helps me. Yeah.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's always so wonderful to talk to you. It just it always feels so good, and
Yeah.
such
Me
a
too.
beautiful person, and I'm so appreciative of all that you give our movement, and um, yeah, I'm really always in admiration and adoration for you. So thank you for
Thank
that.
you, Matt. I really
Um,
appreciate you. And I appreciate the vulnerability with which you moved in this conversation and the presence, you're still you, and it's just great.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Um, so I'm going to hand it over to Peter. I think we're going to have some questions. Uh,
Yes, they have started to come in. So let
Okay,
me
great.
scroll through here and see what we have. Uh, Lydia and Elizabeth ask, do you have any meditations slash readings, spells that you recommend for teachers reading out loud with littles?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think it's an emergent strategy. Let me just check. There's a authenticity chant that I really love in general, that it has this line in it, let me just love me all over the place. Um, and I've done that one with young people, and it's really cute watching them do it because they do love themselves constantly. And then I'm going to work on some more of them. But I also encourage the practice of writing spells with littles. So the process of being like, what are your magical elements? Like, what are some things about you or things about the world around you that are the magical elements that you want to draw on for the spell? And then what is it that you want to call into existence? And like, that's your spell, And with young people, it's like, with my magical hat and my favorite doll, like whatever. They're just gonna, they're really good at co-creating life because that's what they're doing. They're in that stage where they're like, I'm generating most of what's interesting in the world around me. Like I'm a box is a world. So they can turn a lot into a lot, and they're very still in touch with the fact that they are magical. So write spells with them. And then I think that would be good to read out loud.
Matthew, did you want to have anything to add to that?
Oh, not for other than the fact that when Adrienne, when you were reading the solstice spell, I was like, yeah, this is for kids too and everything. Are you recording audiobooks of your books?
Yeah, so this was actually the first book. I think this is the first book where the audiobook came out at the same time as the regular print book came out. It's been a goal. So like my goals are ambitious, you know. I've always had the goal of like the audiobook comes out at the same time, and I also want to translate it in every language at the same time, and I want it in large print and small print and like all of it. So this one is out on audiobook, and the authenticity chant that I'm talking about is on page 197 of Emergent Strategy. And I think it would work good for kids from like middle school up, probably. But I am working on doing children's books and young adult books of most of the projects. So I want to do a young adult, like a sort of puberty era pleasure activism. And I want to do a series of emergent strategy children's books. And like I'm just obsessed with kids, and I think that they so much of this is actually for them. It's for the world that they're going to be living into. So I want to do like a "We Will Not Cancel Us" like practice book for kids, or it's like mediation for little babies, you know, a mediation for kids who are in elementary school. Because I'm like, if you learn it now, it'll just be in your bag, and you're definitely going to need it. So yeah.
So Brittany asks, do you have an example of a loving correction that happened with someone in your life that you feel comfortable sharing? I haven't read the book, but will soon.
Yeah, Brittany. Um, let's see, what's a good one? Oh, um, I recently within the last, I'll say within like a couple years ago, I went and stayed with my parents for a little while. It was actually right after COVID started, like in 2020, in the summer of 2020, I went to live with them because I was just like panicking, and I was like, I need to control them. I need to go there and be in charge of them. That was my, like, if I'm really being honest about what was happening, I was like, I know that they're full grown adults, but they're not following the protocols the way I want them to. Like, I need to go there. Um, and I went and I was living with them for like 4 months. And I, you know, as an adult, had never spent that long of time around them, but I was suddenly around them all the time. So it wasn't like visitation, you know, perspectives on each other. It was like, we're really in here. And I had a lot of opinions on how everything was going and like what they needed to do with their lives. All of a sudden, like I've dropped in like an alien from outer space, just like I've got an opinion on everything. And my mom finally kind of sat me down and was just like, you know, we have managed how she was like, how old are you? And I, you know, I was like, I'm 40. I think at the time I was like 44, 43. And she's like, yeah, so, you know, we were dating for a while and then we got married, and then you came along, and we've been together that whole time figuring out exactly how we do all the things that we do. And it was just like, oh yeah, like what do I know? I have sustained 0 relationships past any years, like, you know, like, or five years, I think is my longest relationship. But it was just like such a sweet, and my mom was just like, you know, she does these, I call them like love ambushes, you know, where she's just like, here's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And it's not that she's like, I'm not willing to hear your feedback, or not like not open to it, but I want you to consider that you're talking to someone who maybe has some knowledge or expertise or practices already in place. And it actually was a really transformative moment for all of my relationships, because I was like, right, everyone I'm talking to is the expert on themselves and how they are. And unless they ask me to give them some guidance or to be in a relationship like that, I don't need to just bust in with like, here's how I could correct y'all, you know? Um, so that would be a loving correction that I received, and that has really shape shifted those relationships.
Any comments, Matthew?
Um, None for me on this one. Yeah.
Okay.
You're
let's
like, not
move
with my
on.
mom on the call.
That's right. Wonderful, loving corrections together we have.
So Jazz says, Adrienne, I like the idea of sharing responsibility for COVID safety versus being everyone's personal self-proclaimed COVID educator. How do you do this one-on-one with loved ones versus the group setting you described in the book tour?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different depending on who it is. So, and where we're coming from. So, like with my local loved ones, I feel like I'm in kind of a pod of people who see each other regularly. And our practice is pretty good at like being like, I've been exposed. How do we want to navigate whatever plans we have? Or how do we want to navigate? That's been the big one is the times where I get upset or hurt, I feel hurt is when someone knows that they've had an exposure. They know, like, I'm like, so you literally know you have a higher potential of being a risk and you're not telling anyone. And that feels really, that's a behavior I don't really understand. Right. And so I'm trying to, I'm like trying to be like, I don't understand it. I'm trying not to hold a bunch of judgment because I think, people have their reasons. But, um, but then if it's people who I'm like, so for instance, people come into Durham all the time and they're like, hey, I want to visit with you. I want to see you. And that's been something that I ask people is I'm like, oh, okay, like what's your COVID protocol right now? Or like, do you understand your status or are you testing or whatever, especially if someone wants to come stay in my place. Um, and there's people where I navigate. So I'm like, I'm gonna admit this here, and like maybe some of those people will see it. But there's certain people where I'm like, I don't trust their protocols, and so I'm like, let's go sit outside. Let's go do like I just am sort of like I'm gonna do some management of it on my own because I want to stay in relationship with this person, or these people. There's a few people like this in my life, but I'm also like, I don't. Maybe trust is not the right word, but I'm like, I know that they're not practicing what I practice. And so I'm like, rather than continue to have it be an argument every single time, I'm just like, oh, if I want to see this person, we sit outside and we meet outside. And often there's a couple people I'm like, and I keep a mask on, and whatever it is. Um, and that I learned the hard way. I learned from being around folks and like I was in a couple of situations where like a ton of people all got COVID from one person or from another person. And I saw what it did to the relationship. So I was like, oh, this, because you really are passing on something that could kill someone. And I mean, those, especially in that first year, there was so much. I think, Matt, you talked about this, we haven't had a chance to grieve, but I'm like, there's so many people I know who are like, yeah, I was responsible for someone else getting sick and they didn't make it. You know, I know people who are carrying that around, and how do you metabolize that into your system? Um, so that was like for me, that was such a big thing. I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I'm not a part of this. And now that we're in this new situation where it's like I really call it swimming upstream. Like even I was on a flight, when I just went on this solo retreat, I was on a flight and just wearing a mask on the plane, which that seems like the most basic
Right.
thing I can imagine is like, oh yeah, you would just give everyone a mask when they're getting on the plane, whatever. At least like very doable. But it feels like you're putting on a big political sign or something to do it. And that has taken organizing, right? That took narrative shift and organizing and dollars. You shift culture. It takes intention to shift culture in that way. So that's been something really fascinating for me is just recognizing like, oh, like people are having to balance a lot of things in addition to their comfort with swimming upstream. Because a lot, um, I had a dear friend of mine, because I was like, what's going on with people? And he was just like, Adrienne, like peer pressure is such a real thing. And it's why we do almost everything we do. And it's part of why I ever get on the internet. It's part of why I've done a series of conversations on the internet. It's because I'm like, oh, like if peer pressure is one of the main things, then I want to help normalize masking and I want to help normalize having COVID safety conversations. I want to normalize being anti-genocide and I want to normalize being anti-fascist. I want to normalize being, like all the things that I care about and loving the earth. I just want to make it like, this is a normal, cool, even sexy way to be, you know, like,
Yeah.
that, so I don't know if that helps exactly with like the one-on-one. I will say pulling the Band-Aid off quickly is almost always my method with one-on-one. And I'm one of the people I'm seeing right now is so helpful with that, where they'll always just be like, can I lift something up to you? And it'll just be like straight to the point. It's like, I want to talk about something very directly. And I find that really helpful too. To just be like, I want to lift something up. The way that we've been handling this situation has not made me feel safe, or it has not made me feel protected. Or even I will say one of the biggest things for me is just asking people, like, if I notice them sniffling or coughing around me or anything like that, just being willing to say, hey, do you have a sense of what's going on? Because you seem to be sniffling or you seem to be coughing. And I'm totally down to like mask up like right now, or to shift our practice right now. And in one-on-one relationship, I think the thing that has been wonderful is to be like, oh, we can shift our practice midstream. Like, we can actually decide right now to do it a different way. And you can save lives like that, because it is exposure over time really
Yeah.
has a big impact. Matt, I'd love to hear from you a bit on this too, because one of the things that I found the most challenging, and I don't really know how to navigate, is when people are coming in with really different sets of information
Yeah.
around how COVID spreads or around what happens. So I feel like I talk to some people who are like, oh yeah, like, you can't be in the same air for this amount of time, and like da 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 da. And I have other folks who are like, oh no, like you'd have to be around someone for like this long, like, and it's really just like how to navigate that level of difference, where like, is this misinformation, is it like different sources that I
Sure.
always, my only practice that I can say is I tend to defer to a person who has more disability in this circumstance, because I'm like, my practice is I know more about how I survive my disability than anyone else
Yeah.
does. And so that's my practice. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you on how you
Yeah.
navigate that.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I think I will say that, I came out the gate very optimistic about the conversations, and have kind of rolled that back a bit, and I don't know also how much that would, part of it is my energy is very limited, because of the long COVID itself. So, you know, even doing the sort of emotional sort of labor is so draining, especially when I'm trying to navigate the systems, when I'm trying to navigate a profession and an industry where I have to be unmasked to do my job when no one else is taking any precautions. I have to put my life on the line to do my job. And, it's so acute for me. So I have very little space at this moment in time for people who are not willingly jumping in and like, I want to show up, I want to support, I want to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Not just for me specifically, but one of the things I did, and I did this originally when I shifted my disordered relationship with eating, which then caused my body to get larger, was it was exhausting to have conversations with people explaining that, right? Particularly as an actor. So I started out by writing a letter that ended up becoming an article called My Journey to Radical Body Positivity.
Yeah.
And I realized that it's like a 101 basically of like everything you need to know to show up for me. If it's like a living boundary, right? Where if you read this, if you can, integrate this into your being and show up for me, then I know that we have a chance of making this go forward. But
Yeah.
if you don't handle it with the sensitivity of what it is, then I don't have to do the emotional labor of explaining to you all the things and hoping you can get it. I can just know that
Yeah.
at least for what I've been telling myself now is not right now.
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, putting that together, and that includes like, you know, it's a disability justice 101, and it's about, it's funny because it's a very technical thing, right? To understand like how it moves, right? And I didn't understand this for the longest time either, that
Yeah.
it's airborne. It moves like smoke, right? So it's not for the longest time, I'd wear these cloth masks. I'm like, as long as it blocks the droplets from getting in my mouth, I'm fine. But if someone is smoking in a space, it fills the air. Um,
Exactly.
so having those things listed has been helpful. But it is, again, such an act of vulnerability to say, again, like, I don't need you to just show up for me. I need you to show up for all disabled people. And the boundary I've been moving towards is, like, for us to be in a relationship, I do need masking from you in places where disabled people have to be, which is
Yes.
public transportation, pharmacies, medical settings, because I
Yes.
have people, including the person that I love that I was talking about earlier, who can't access medical care, right? Who can't go to the dentist even though their wisdom teeth are pushing through because they can't trust that people know
Yeah.
means to protect against an airborne virus. And because I know how exhausting it is in medical settings, even to have to advocate every time and say, can you wear a better mask? So
Yep.
um,
Put it over your nose and like,
right, can it be sealed? Yeah, all
yeah.
these different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of how I'm dealing with it. There's amazing, beautiful community building. There's these clean air clubs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, Adrienne, but these organizations that are popping up all over the place where they, like, have a lending library of air purifiers, and they will go to, like, art events, music events, and
Ah,
clean the air. Some of them are mask required too. So people are building this in a beautiful way.
beautiful.
Giving a hope as well.
That makes me really happy to hear, because I do feel like that those are the adaptations that are needed where it's like, okay, if I can't afford to have this level of practice at all times. It's also reminding me, back when we were doing the Allied Media Conference, there was this whole thing that played out around sense, like having spaces where there was no sense,
Mhm.
and that was like a chemical sensitivity. It was like it's like, oh, this is something that's impacting a lot of our community. And I remember then being like, here's the protocol and here's the practice, and like, are you down to be in the practice or not? And again, it was one that I was like, oh, I don't really know about this, like da da da. And what I found was so interesting was it became a community for me. It became like a community thing, right? Where every time I was in the Bay Area, it's a huge practice there, and everyone is in that practice. And then when I would go other places, I was like, this isn't the practice here, but there is something else that is.
Hmm.
And it's almost like when I travel outside the country, I'm like, what are the protocols here?
Right.
And how are we practicing? And I think that it's like, oh, we create these communities of practice, and then communities of practice grow and they let us see what else becomes possible.
Mhm.
It's like, and I have found, I will say that I don't mind letting go of people who can't care for me, and who don't let me care for them, because really that's what it is, like for the longest time I was just like, I'm trying to protect your ass. Like, I'm not, yeah, I'm like, and especially for me, because I'm like, I'm not getting sick. I keep being around tons of people who are sick, and I'm not ever getting sick. So I'm like super vax and super masked and all that, but I'm really doing this to make sure I don't pass something on, especially, or if someone comes to an event that I'm doing, I'm like, I'm I want this so that everyone here can walk away and live forever, So there's something there where I'm just like, oh, if you don't want to take care of yourself, like, then that I can't hold that for you, and I can't control it. I have to let go of control over it
Yeah.
and just be like, I'm an invitation. So I love that you're like, here's kind of the bar
Yeah.
for me. And it's just the basics of it getting to be a part of my life.
Absolutely.
I kind of feel like yeah, it feels like there's something in there for all of us, to just be like, everyone could actually have that for themselves. It's like, here's what it takes to be in relationship with me.
Totally. Absolutely. And as painful as it is, as someone who is a recovering people pleaser, it is
Mhm.
a liberating thing to say that, like, you know, I deserve to be seen and to be safe. And if that's not what's happening here, I'll even give you the books to read,
Yeah,
that if you want to come back in my life at some point, we can have that conversation maybe
that's great.
later.
That's great.
But I
Oh, I
can't.
love that.
Yeah.
My friend Janine de Novais has written this book called Brave Community, and she wrote the afterword for this book. But she's a dear, dear friend of mine. But one of the practices of Brave Community is a protocol that you use to talk about race, but you can use it to talk about anything hard. And one of the pieces is grounding. And the grounding is like, let's have a common piece of something, a movie, a film, a book, a piece of art, but let's have something that we're going to both consume and look at together. And then we can talk, we can have a grounded conversation where we're looking at the same thing. And it feels very much like what you're talking about, where I'm like, if we want to do it, like, I need you to have read this,
Right.
read it, and then we can talk,
Yeah.
or we can, I mean, actually, this whole book of Love and Corrections is in some ways meant to be that, where it's like, this is where we are about race, and here's where we are about gender, and here's where we are about COVID, and here's where we are about Zionism, and here's where we are about, we actually know a lot about these things already. And in a way, there's a lot of 101 in here, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wanted it to be a book where it's like, just you read it and find what's helpful for you in it. And then I keep telling people, I'm like, and then give it to your racist uncle, right? Give it to your like homophobic auntie, and give it to the person in your life who struggles with, just loving people as they are, and read it with your siblings and figure out if you want to create a sibling check-in practice, or, it's meant to be something that can be a set of grounding materials, right? So yeah, I really appreciate that approach.
Yeah.
Well, we find ourselves past the top of the hour. Any final thoughts before we go?
Anything for you, Matt?
Oh, that's for us. I thought maybe it was a question thing. Great. Final thought. No, just again, deep gratitude and appreciation. And I know it's been a while since we've gotten to chat in real time, but it always feels very easy to slip into it. And thanks for being who you are in the world, and for your contributions. I appreciate you. I know we all do.
Yeah, thank you. I feel deep gratitude for you, and I'm really glad to see your face and to see you surviving and see you thriving, and see the strength. I feel a lot of strength in your position right now. And it's really powerful. Like, there's so much strength and vulnerability. I know it's a cliche to say that, but it's so deep to actually witness it and be like, oh, look at you. Like, I like this masculinity. I like this energy. And then I think the other thing is, yeah, I keep wanting to just remind people, like, we get to shape this moment. These love and corrections, a lot of it is like about taking responsibility for shaping change and for shaping the world around us, and for not just witnessing harm happening or witnessing regression happening, but learning how to move into those moments and not give up on our people. That's so much of what this book is saying. Like, there's a politic out there that wants to have us just divide and divide and divide and divide and shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And this book is like, don't give up on each other. Find a way to like have the hard conversation while holding hands. So yeah, it's just really an invitation into relationship. And I hope that it lands with people in that way. Yeah.
Well, City Lights is grateful to the both of you for what you do. There has been so much love in the room tonight. It comes through in the chat. And I want to remind everyone, we've posted links with which you may purchase books. Also, there's a link for Matthew's organization if you want to learn more about that. Such an honor and such a pleasure. You're both doing such amazing work. Adrienne Maree Brown, congratulations on another great book.
Thank you so much. And thank you, City Lights. Y'all are the best. I love coming to get to talk with y'all.
And Matthew McGorry, grateful for you for doing the honors tonight. Good luck in all that you're doing. Please check out the links we've posted. Better yet, if you're in the hood, come on down, pay us a visit. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach District. We're open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We have a full selection of books from Adrienne. And today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, fostering an active engagement with books and literary culture and activism through our public events, our publishing program, and educational outreach. It's all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and critical thinkers. So long, everyone. Take care, be kind to each other, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. That's what I wanted
Um,
to do. I was like, please. Bye. Love you, Matt.